What does a man do when he has everything? A beautiful pregnant wife, a billion-dollar tech empire, and the respect of the world. For Ethan Cole, the answer was simple. He threw it all away for a mistress. He thought his power made him untouchable, that he could silence his wife's pain with his fists. But he made one catastrophic mistake. He forgot who she was before she took his name. He forgot she was a Hawthorne. And the Hawthornes don't just get even. They rewrite history, erasing their enemies from the pages of success, until all that's left is a cautionary tale whispered in the dark. This is the story of how one brutal mistake cost a man his entire world. The penthouse at 157 was less a home and more a statement. Spanning the entire 85th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Central Park, a sprawling green tapestry stitched into the heart of Manhattan. From this height, the city's relentless energy was muted, the yellow cabs like tiny crawling beetles, the cacophony of sirens, a distant, ignorable hum. It was a world of serene, sterile perfection, and Olivia Cole felt like its most beautiful, most trapped ornament. Her husband, Ethan Cole, was the architect of this cage. He was the golden boy of the tech world, the founder and CEO of Nexus Dynamics, a company that had revolutionized data security with its impenetrable Aegis software. To the world, he was a visionary, a charismatic genius whose face graced the covers of Forbes and Wired. To Olivia, he was becoming a stranger who shared her bed, but not her life. He moved through their opulent apartment with a distracted air. His mind always elsewhere, his fingers perpetually ghosting over the screen of his phone as if it were a lifeline to a world more interesting than the one she occupied. Their marriage, once a whirlwind of passionate romance that had been the envy of their social circle, had cooled into a polite, hollow arrangement. The laughter that used to echo through their cavernous living room had been replaced by the soft, almost apologetic clinking of cutlery on fine china during their silent dinners. Ethan was a master of the grand, empty gesture. A rare Cartier necklace would appear on her pillow after he'd missed their anniversary dinner for the 3rd year in a row. A fleet of florists would deliver an entire garden's worth of peonies to the penthouse the morning after a particularly cruel, dismissive argument. He bought her forgiveness, assuming her silence was a transaction. Olivia tried to convince herself this was just the price of ambition. Ethan was building an empire, and empires required sacrifice. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as a gallery curator, her circle of friends who found Ethan's polished arrogance off-putting, and now her own sense of self. She floated through her days in a haze of Pilates classes, charity luncheons, and fittings with designers who treated her like a life-sized doll. She had everything a woman could ever want, and yet she felt an aching, cavernous void. Then came the 2 pink lines on a slender white stick. Pregnancy. It felt like a miracle, a divine intervention designed to save them. This, she thought with a surge of desperate hope, would be the anchor that moored Ethan back to her, back to them. A child, their child, would surely melt the ice that had formed around his heart. She planned the reveal meticulously, arranging a private dinner on their terrace overlooking the glittering cityscape. She wore the sapphire dress he'd once said made her eyes look like the deep ocean. When she finally presented him with a small, elegantly wrapped box containing a tiny pair of designer baby shoes and the positive pregnancy test. His reaction was not what she had dreamed of. There was no joy, no tears, no sweeping her up into his arms. Instead, A flicker of something unreadable, annoyance, panic crossed his face before being instantly suppressed, replaced by the practiced, camera-ready smile he used for shareholders. "Well," he said, his voice smooth and detached as he examined the tiny shoe. "This is unexpected." He placed the box on the table as if it were a business proposal he needed time to consider. "We'll need to make arrangements. A bigger staff, a proper nursery. I'll have my assistant Jessica look into the best pediatricians." He spoke of their child like a project to be managed, a new asset to be acquired and properly maintained. He didn't touch her. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He just stared out at the city, his jaw tight. The conversation quickly shifted back to Nexus dynamics, to a hostile takeover bid. He was fending off from a rival firm, a new product launch in Seoul. The baby, their supposed miracle, became a footnote in the evening's agenda. The following weeks only deepened Olivia's sense of unease. Ethan grew even more distant, his nights at the office becoming, later his business trips, more frequent and vague. He often came home smelling faintly of a perfume she didn't wear, a heavy, cloying scent of jasmine and sandalwood that clung to the fibers of his custom-tailored suits. When she questioned him, he would deploy his most potent weapon, gaslighting. "Don't be paranoid, Olivia. It was a networking event. The room was full of people," he'd say, his tone laced with a weary impatience that made her feel needy and foolish. "You're getting emotional. It must be the hormones." He made her doubt her own senses, her own intuition. The calls he took in hushed tones while stepping out onto the balcony, the way he angled his phone screen away from her, the sudden password protection on a laptop that had always been open. Each was a small splinter of betrayal. She saw the name Scarlett flash on his screen once before he snatched the phone away. When she asked, he said it was Scarlett Vance, a new aggressive venture capitalist he was trying to win over. The explanation was plausible, almost too plausible. The gilded cage was beginning to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. The panoramic views of the city no longer looked like a kingdom at her feet, but a vast, indifferent world she couldn't reach. Every day, the baby inside her grew a tiny, innocent life, completely unaware of the cracks spreading through the foundation of its family. Olivia would place a hand on her swelling abdomen, a silent promise to protect this child from the cold, sterile world Ethan had built. She just didn't yet realize that the greatest danger wasn't outside the penthouse walls, but standing right beside her. Scarlett Vance was not just a venture capitalist. She was a predator in couture. With hair the color of polished obsidian and eyes that missed nothing, she moved through the high-stakes world of New York finance with the lethal grace of a panther. She had clawed her way up from nothing, using her sharp intellect and even sharper stilettos to carve out a reputation for being ruthless, brilliant, and utterly devoid of sentiment. Men were either obstacles or stepping stones, and Ethan Cole, with his vast resources and fragile ego, was the most promising stepping stone she had ever encountered. Their meeting wasn't a coincidence. Scarlett had targeted him. She studied Nexus dynamics, identified its vulnerabilities, and then engineered an introduction at a tech summit in Aspen. She didn't flatter him with the fawning praise he received from others. Instead, she challenged him, dissecting his latest keynote with a surgical precision that left him both infuriated and deeply intrigued. She spoke his language, the language of power, ambition, and conquest. Ethan, accustomed to Olivia's gentle compliance, was electrified by Scarlett's fire. She was everything his wife was not: aggressive, cynical, and openly transactional. Their relationship began under the guise of business, with late-night strategy sessions in hotel bars and confidential meetings that bled into intimate dinners. Scarlett made him feel like the genius the world saw, not the emotionally vacant husband Olivia's sad eyes reflected back at him. She didn't want his heart. She wanted a percentage of his empire, and that was a currency Ethan understood far better than love. The affair escalated quickly. Ethan, a man who prided himself on control, became reckless. He bought Scarlett a lavish apartment in Soho, a black Range Rover, and a portfolio of jewelry that rivaled Olivia's. He justified it to himself as the cost of doing business, of keeping a valuable and potentially dangerous ally happy. But it was more than that. With Scarlett, he could indulge the basest parts of his nature without judgment. His arrogance was not just tolerated, but celebrated. His ruthlessness was not a flaw, but a shared value. While Olivia was at home overseeing the construction of a state-of-the-art nursery, decorated in muted tones of cream and sage green, Ethan was with Scarlett in her minimalist chrome and leather apartment, drinking single malt scotch and mapping out the future of his company. He was living a double life, and the strain was beginning to show not in guilt, but in an escalating cruelty towards the woman who represented the life he now found so suffocating. Olivia's pregnancy, which should have been a joy, became his excuse for everything. Her morning sickness was an inconvenience that disrupted his sleep. Her food cravings were a sign of her lack of discipline. Her exhaustion was a drain on his energy. He used her vulnerability as a weapon against her, chipping away at her confidence with a steady barrage of criticism disguised as concern. "Are you sure you should be eating that, Olivia? Think of the baby," he'd say, eyeing a small bowl of pasta with disdain. "You need to rest. You look pale," he'd comment, steering her away from a social event where he might have to pretend to be a doting husband for too long. The evidence of his betrayal was no longer subtle. Olivia found a receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet from Harry Winston, a gift she never received. She discovered charges for dinners at restaurants he claimed he'd never been to, airline tickets for 2 to the Cayman Islands, for a weekend he'd supposedly spent at a solo coding retreat. Each discovery was a fresh wound, a confirmation of the lies that now formed the very air she breathed. Her friends, the few she had managed to keep, urged her to confront him, to leave him. But where would she go? The prenuptial agreement she'd signed without a second thought was ironclad, designed by Ethan's cutthroat lawyers to leave her with virtually nothing. More importantly, she was carrying his child. She clung to the fading hope that the baby's arrival would change him, that holding his own son or daughter in his arms would perform the miracle she had once prayed for. The tipping point came during the annual gala for the Children's Health Foundation, an event Olivia had passionately chaired for years. Ethan, who had promised to be by her side, called at the last minute to cancel, citing a server crisis at Nexus that required his immediate attention. Disappointed but accustomed to it, Olivia went alone, her 5-month baby bump proudly displayed in a custom-made gown of emerald silk. She was delivering her speech, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke of the need to protect the most vulnerable when she saw him. He wasn't at the office. He was across the ballroom, standing half-hidden behind a marble column, his hand resting possessively on the lower back of a striking woman in a blood-red dress. It was Scarlett Vance, the woman from the news articles, the venture capitalist. They were not talking business. The way he looked at her, the way his thumb stroked the silk of her dress, the proprietary smile on his face, it was a language Olivia knew intimately, because it was how he had once looked at her. Time seemed to slow down. The applause from the audience sounded like rushing water in her ears. She saw Scarlett lean in and whisper something in Ethan's ear, her red lips brushing against his skin. Ethan laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that Olivia hadn't heard in years. In that moment, the carefully constructed denial Olivia had been living in shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a mistake. This was a replacement. He had already moved on, and she was just a legacy system he hadn't yet bothered to decommission. She finished her speech on autopilot, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She fled the stage, ignoring the concerned looks and outstretched hands, and ran out into the cold New York night. The serpent's image burned into her mind. The taxi ride back to the penthouse was a blur of streetlights and tears. Olivia walked through the cold, silent apartment, the echoes of the gala's fake laughter still ringing in her ears. Ethan's betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a visceral, undeniable fact. The sight of his hand on Scarlett's back was a brand on her memory. For hours, she sat in the dark, the city lights painting cold streaks across the marble floors, a storm of grief, rage, and terror brewing inside her. Ethan came home just before 3 a.m., humming softly to himself, reeking of jasmine sandalwood and expensive whiskey. He was still radiating the high of his evening, the arrogance of a man who believed he could have it all. He flicked on the lights in the grand salon, and the sudden glare made Olivia flinch. He stopped short when he saw her sitting there, her emerald gown crumpled her face, pale and stained with tears. "Olivia, what are you doing sitting in the dark? You scared me," he said. His voice laced with annoyance, not concern. He began to loosen his tie, his guard already going up. "There was a server crisis, you said." Olivia's voice was unnervingly calm, a quiet prelude to the hurricane. "A big one. Required your personal attention." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He recognized the tone. It was handled. "What's this about? I saw you, Ethan." The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. At the gala. With her. Scarlett Vance. The color drained from his face. The carefully constructed wall between his two worlds had just been breached. For a moment he was speechless, caught in the headlights of his own deceit. But Ethan's default response to being cornered was not remorse. It was attack. "You were spying on me," he snarled, deflecting. "Following me. What is wrong with you? I was at my own charity event." Olivia's voice finally broke, rising with hysteria and pain. "The one you couldn't be bothered to attend because of a server crisis. How stupid do you think I am? The receipts, the late nights, the perfume. It all makes sense now. How long, Ethan? How long have you been laughing at me behind my back?" She stood up, her body trembling. One hand instinctively moving to shield her pregnant belly. The evidence was irrefutable. The confrontation she had dreaded and craved was finally here. She expected more lies, more denials. Instead, something in him snapped. The mask of the charming tech mogul fell away, revealing the ugly, entitled monster beneath. "So what if I was—" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "So what? Are you really that naive? Did you think this was going to be enough for me?" He gestured around the opulent penthouse, a look of utter contempt on his face. "This life, this domesticity. It's suffocating. Scarlett understands me. She challenges me. She isn't a fragile, emotional wreck who needs constant validation." Each word was a poisoned dart, aimed to wound her in the deepest, most vulnerable places. He was stripping away their entire history, rewriting it as a burden he had been forced to carry. "I am carrying your child," she screamed, the sound raw and desperate. Your child. Does that mean nothing to you? Don't you dare use that to manipulate me, he sneered, taking a menacing step closer. You think having a baby was going to trap me, fix everything? That's your pathetic fantasy, not mine. Olivia was blinded by rage and grief. In a moment of pure, unthinking impulse, she slapped him across the face. The crack of her palm against his skin echoed in the cavernous room, a sound of finality. The shock on Ethan's face lasted only a second before it morphed into a terrifying, cold fury. His eyes went dark. You should not have done that, he said, his voice dangerously low. Before she could react, he grabbed her by the arms, his fingers digging into her skin like talons. He shoved her backward. Olivia stumbled her heel, catching on the edge of an expensive Persian rug. She lost her balance and fell hard, crashing against the sharp corner of a glass coffee table. A blinding, searing pain shot through her side and abdomen. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The air knocked out of her lungs. She lay on the floor, gasping, a wave of terror washing over her that was far greater than any fear for herself. The baby. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes pleading. He stood over her, his chest heaving, his face a mask of remorseless rage. He didn't move to help her. He didn't show an ounce of concern. He just stared down at his pregnant wife on the floor as if she were a piece of furniture he had carelessly knocked over. This is your fault, he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. You and your drama. He turned and walked away, heading toward their bedroom, leaving her crumpled on the floor. The physical pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the shattering realization of what he was. He was not just an adulterer or a liar. He was a monster. A warm, damp sensation spread beneath her. With trembling hands, she reached down. Her fingers came away stained with blood. A primal scream of pure terror ripped from her throat. The baby. He had hurt their baby. Adrenaline surged through her, overriding the pain. She couldn't stay here. He would leave her to die. Crawling, dragging herself across the cold marble, she managed to reach her purse by the door. Her hands shook so violently she could barely operate her phone. She didn't call 911. Her first and only instinct was to call the one number that represented absolute safety, absolute power, and absolute retribution. Her father. She found the contact Dad in her phone and pressed call. It rang once before a familiar, calm voice answered. Olivia, it's late. Is everything all right? Dad, she sobbed, her voice a choked, broken whisper as she stared at the blood on her hands. He hurt me. Ethan, he hurt me. Please help me. Help the baby. The line went silent for a single, terrifying beat. And then the voice of Richard Hawthorne, a man who could move markets and topple governments with a single phone call, came back transformed. It was no longer the voice of a loving father. It was the sound of ice cracking of an avalanche, beginning its slow, unstoppable descent. Where are you, sweetheart? He asked, his voice now lethally calm. Don't move. I'm sending my people. They'll be there in 10 minutes. We're coming to bring you home. The Hawthorne family was not merely wealthy. They were a dynasty, an institution woven into the very fabric of American power. Their fortune wasn't new or flashy, derived from volatile tech stocks or fleeting trends. It was old, established, and vast, built over generations on shipping real estate and strategic control of global commodities. They operated from a sprawling 200-acre estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, a fortress of old stone and modern security, known simply as the Crest. To be a Hawthorne was to be born into a world where loyalty was paramount, and betrayal was met with a swift, devastating response. Richard Hawthorne ended the call with his daughter, and the mask of paternal concern was replaced by a face carved from granite. He sat in his leather-bound study, surrounded by portraits of his ancestors, men who had faced down presidents and pirates with the same unblinking resolve. He pressed an intercom button on his mahogany desk. "Alexander," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "Meet me in the study. Now. It's Olivia." Minutes later, Alexander Hawthorne strode into the room. He was his father's son, taller, broader, with the sharp intelligence of a corporate lawyer and the barely concealed aggression of a linebacker. He was the COO of Hawthorne Global, the public face of the family's business, but his true role was that of enforcer. "What's happened?" Alexander asked, seeing the look on his father's face. Ethan Cole put his hands on her. Richard said the words falling like chips of ice. "She's pregnant, and she's bleeding. Our medical and security teams are en route to her now. They have 10 minutes to get her out of that apartment." Alexander's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle pulsed in his cheek. The protective fury he felt for his younger sister was a physical force. "I'll kill him." "No," Richard said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, far more terrifying than any shout. "Killing him is too quick. It's an act of passion. We are not passionate men, Alexander. We are methodical. He built an empire. We are going to turn it to dust and salt the earth where it stood. He is going to wake up every morning for the rest of his miserable life and regret the day he ever heard the name Hawthorne." While Richard spoke, he was already moving. He made 2 calls. The first was to Dr. Roberts, the family's private physician and head of a discreet elite medical unit that catered exclusively to the global 1%. The second was to Gavin, the head of their security detail, a former Special Forces commander who handled the family's more sensitive problems. The instructions were simple and absolute. Extract Olivia. Ensure the safety of her and the child at all costs. No one, especially not Ethan Cole, was to interfere. Back in the Manhattan penthouse, the 10 minutes felt like an eternity to Olivia. She lay huddled by the door, listening to the sound of Ethan moving around in the master suite, completely oblivious. Then she heard the quiet, almost imperceptible click of the private elevator's lock being overridden. The doors slid open, not with a ding, but with a whisper. 4 men in dark, functional suits stepped out. They moved with an unnerving, silent efficiency. One, clearly the medic, knelt beside her immediately, his calm voice a soothing balm on her terror. "Olivia, I'm Dr. Roberts. We're going to take care of you." The other 3, led by a man with cold, watchful eyes, formed a protective perimeter, their gazes fixed on the hallway leading to the bedroom. Just then, Ethan emerged dressed in a fresh suit, ready to head to the office as if nothing had happened. He stopped dead, his face a mixture of shock and fury, as he saw the strangers in his home surrounding his wife. "Who the hell are you? Get out of my house!" he bellowed, his voice echoing with impotent rage. The man with the cold eyes, Gavin, took a single step forward. He was not a large man, but he radiated an aura of absolute authority that made Ethan's bravado seem childish. "Mr. Cole," Gavin said, his voice flat and calm. "Mrs. Cole is leaving with us. You will remain here. You will not follow us. You will not contact her. This is not a request." "She is my wife. You can't just—" Gavin's hand moved in a blur, producing a small, silenced device that was unmistakably a taser. "I assure you we can. One more word, and we will incapacitate you. The choice is yours." Ethan, for the first time in his life, was confronted with power far greater than his own. He was a bully who had just run into a pack of wolves. He stood there sputtering as Dr. Roberts and another man gently lifted Olivia onto a portable stretcher and carried her to the elevator. Her last sight of her husband was of him standing alone and powerless in his palace, his face pale with a dawning, horrified understanding. The journey to the Crest was a seamless operation. A private ambulance devoid of any markings was waiting in a secure underground garage. They sped out of the city, bypassing all traffic, with a discreet escort Olivia never even saw. She was stabilized, given medication to stop the bleeding, and hooked up to a portable fetal heart monitor. The steady rhythmic beat of her baby's heart was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She arrived at the family estate to find her father and brother waiting under the grand portico. Richard gently stroked her hair as she was moved to the estate's fully equipped medical wing. His eyes filled with a love that was now intertwined with a chilling promise of vengeance. Once Olivia was settled, and the doctors confirmed that both she and the baby, though shaken, would be fine, Richard and Alexander returned to the study. The room had become a war room. A team of the family's top lawyers and forensic accountants had been summoned from their beds and were already assembling, their faces grim. Richard stood before the fireplace, staring into the flames. "He used our seed money," he said softly. "I gave him his first $5 million as a wedding gift. Our money is in the foundation of that company. We have a right to inspect the books." Alexander nodded, his mind already working. "We'll start there. A full audit. We'll find every discrepancy, every padded expense account, every shell corporation he's using to hide assets. We'll leak it to the SEC, the IRS, and every financial blog that matters." "The board," Richard continued. "We placed 2 of our people on his board to protect our initial investment. They've been dormant, but it's time to wake them up. Call them. I want a vote of no confidence initiated by the end of the week. Cite erratic leadership and potential financial misconduct. And Scarlett Vance." Alexander added his voice like gravel. "I'll have our investigators do a deep dive. Everyone has secrets. We'll find hers and make sure they see the light of day at the most inopportune time." The lion had roared. The Hawthorne machine, a behemoth of wealth, influence, and ruthless efficiency, was now fully engaged. It was aimed like a cannon at one man. Ethan Cole had assaulted a Hawthorne. He had no idea that he had just signed the death warrant for his entire empire. He was about to learn that some families don't just close ranks, they go to war. For Ethan Cole, the first sign that the world was tilting off its axis was subtle. It came in the form of an email at 7:00 a.m. the Monday after the incident. A major investor, a notoriously cautious pension fund he had spent months courting, was pulling out of a $50 million funding round, citing new concerns about corporate governance. Ethan was furious, but dismissed it as a case of cold feet. Then the tremors started. A call from his CFO, his voice strained with panic. 2 of his board members, long-time quiet allies of the Hawthorne family, whom Ethan had always considered harmless figureheads, had just invoked a little-known clause in the company's bylaws demanding an immediate, unscheduled, and comprehensive forensic audit of Nexus Dynamics. The demand was legally airtight. Ethan felt a prickle of cold sweat on his neck. It was too much of a coincidence. He tried to call Olivia. Her number was disconnected. He tried to call her father Richard, the man who had shaken his hand at his wedding and given him the seed money that started it all. The call went straight to a stern-voiced assistant who informed him that Mr. Hawthorne was unavailable indefinitely. The assault began in earnest. It wasn't a frontal attack, but a campaign of 1,000 cuts orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign from the war room at the Crest. Hawthorne Global's lawyers, the most feared in corporate America, swarmed Nexus Dynamics. The audit was not a simple review of the books. It was an vivisection. They descended on his offices demanding every email, every expense report, every scrap of data from the last 5 years. Ethan's carefully constructed corporate veil was being systematically shredded. Simultaneously, Alexander Hawthorne activated their network in the financial press. Anonymous, impeccably sourced stories began to appear on influential blogs and in the Wall Street Journal. The articles hinted at a toxic leadership culture, at Nexus' inflated user base numbers, and potential accounting irregularities. The language was careful, avoiding outright libel, but the damage was immediate and catastrophic. Nexus Dynamics stock, once the darling of the tech world, began to slide. First by a few points, then by 10, then 20. Billions in market capitalization vanished in a matter of days. Ethan was trapped in a nightmare. Key engineers, the lifeblood of his company, were suddenly poached by rival firms with offers so astronomical Nexus couldn't possibly match them. He later learned that these rival firms had recently received significant quiet investment from a Hawthorne-owned subsidiary. His biggest clients began to cancel their contracts, citing the negative press and instability in Nexus's leadership. The Aegis software, once hailed as impenetrable, was now the subject of a devastating report by a top cybersecurity firm, a firm secretly owned by Hawthorne Global that exposed a critical, previously unknown vulnerability. He was fighting a ghost war. Every fire he tried to put out was just a diversion for another bigger one, starting somewhere else. His allies in the industry grew distant, his calls going unanswered. The stench of failure was upon him, and no one wanted to be near him when the whole rotten structure came crashing down. Throughout this chaos, Scarlett Vance was his only confidant. He would meet her in her Soho apartment, ranting about conspiracies and corporate espionage, completely blind to the fact that the woman stroking his hair and pouring him another glass of scotch was a viper planning her own strike. Scarlett was no fool. She saw the writing on the wall. Her association with Ethan was rapidly becoming a liability, but she had no intention of walking away empty-handed. While Ethan was distracted, she was quietly downloading Nexus's most valuable asset, the source code for their next-generation security platform, Aegis 2.0, a project so secret only a handful of people knew of its existence. She saw it as her severance package. Her betrayal was the final, most devastating blow, and it was, of course, orchestrated by the Hawthornes. Alexander's investigators had discovered Scarlett's insatiable greed and her history of playing fast and loose with corporate ethics. They approached her through a shell corporation, posing as a deep-pocketed Asian tech conglomerate looking to acquire a competitive edge. They offered her an obscene amount of money for proprietary data from a leading US tech firm. They didn't have to name Nexus. Scarlett took the bait without a moment's hesitation. The day Ethan's world truly ended, he was in a brutal emergency board meeting. The Hawthorne-aligned members presented a dossier detailing his lavish spending on Scarlett, all billed to a corporate expense account disguised as consulting fees. They showed evidence of his gross mismanagement and the catastrophic stock decline under his leadership. They called for an immediate vote of no confidence. As his professional life was being executed in the boardroom, His phone buzzed. It was a text from Scarlett. "I know who's doing this to you. A rival wants Aegis 2.0. I can help. Meet me. I have a plan." Hope, desperate and foolish, surged in his chest. He stormed out of the board meeting, leaving them to their vote, and raced to her apartment. He found it empty, stripped of all her personal belongings. The only thing she had left was a single engraved flash drive on the coffee table. He plugged it into his laptop, thinking it was the data he needed to save himself. Instead of source code, a single video file opened. It was security footage from the hallway outside his penthouse on the night he had assaulted Olivia. The audio was crystal clear. His venomous words, her scream of pain, the sickening thud of her body hitting the table. And then a few minutes later, the silent, efficient arrival of the Hawthorne security team. His blood ran cold. It was irrefutable. It was a coffin nail. As he stared at the screen in horror, a dozen FBI agents burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Ethan Cole, you're under arrest for corporate espionage," the lead agent barked. "We have a signed confession and evidence from your accomplice, Scarlett Vance, that you conspired to sell company secrets to a foreign power." Scarlett had played her final card. To get a lighter sentence for her own crimes, she had framed him for everything using the stolen data as proof of his intent to sell. The shell corporation she had been dealing with had of course been a Hawthorne front all along, and they had recorded every incriminating conversation before handing them and Scarlett over to the federal authorities. The empire was not just crumbling. It had been utterly annihilated. Ethan Cole, the titan of tech, was led away in handcuffs, his ruin absolute and complete. The wheels of justice, when greased by the Hawthorne fortune, turn with breathtaking speed. Ethan Cole was not afforded the luxury of a prolonged legal battle. His bail was set at an impossibly high figure, and with all his personal and corporate assets frozen by the federal investigation and the ongoing lawsuits, he was utterly penniless. The high-powered lawyers who had once flocked to him now wouldn't even return his calls. He was forced to rely on a court-appointed public defender, an earnest but hopelessly outmatched young man who looked at the mountain of evidence against his client with despair. Ethan sat in a sterile interrogation room, the adrenaline of the arrest having worn off, replaced by a hollow, sickening dread. The charges were a masterpiece of strategic destruction, corporate espionage, wire fraud, securities fraud. And thanks to the video evidence and Olivia's testimony to the DA, a slew of assault charges. He was facing decades in a federal prison. After 2 days of isolation, the door to the interrogation room opened. It wasn't his lawyer. It was Alexander Hawthorne. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, looking as calm and composed as if he were about to begin a business negotiation. He placed a slim leather briefcase on the metal table and sat down opposite Ethan. "Hello, Ethan," Alexander said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "You look unwell." Ethan stared at him, his eyes bloodshot, his face a mask of haggard disbelief. "You did this," he rasped. "All of it. The stocks, the audit. Scarlett, you destroyed me." "Destroyed is such an ugly word," Alexander replied, a faint, chilling smile touching his lips. "We prefer corporate restructuring. You built your company on my family's money. You married my sister and swore to protect her. You violated our trust on both counts. This isn't a destruction, Ethan. It's a repossession." He opened the briefcase. Inside were 2 sets of documents. "This is your life now," Alexander said, sliding the first pile of papers across the table. "This is the government's case against you. My people have been assisting them. We found 3 offshore accounts you didn't think we knew about. We found the doctored invoices you used to pay for your mistress's lifestyle. And of course, we have the video of what you did to my sister. The prosecutor is quite eager. With this evidence, you will be convicted on all counts. You will likely die in prison." Ethan's face went ashen. He had thought he was so clever, so careful. He never imagined anyone would have the resources or the will to dig this deep. "But," Alexander continued, his voice dropping slightly, "my father is a man who believes in clean slates. He doesn't want my sister's child to grow up with a father in a prison jumpsuit. He finds it distasteful, so we are offering you an alternative." He slid the second set of documents across the table. "This is your salvation. Option B." Ethan looked down at the papers. The first was a full confession to the assault on Olivia, to be held in escrow and released if he ever violated the terms of the agreement. The second was a document relinquishing all parental rights to his unborn child, effective immediately. The third was a set of contracts, signing over the last remnants of his intellectual property, and every single share he still held in Nexus Dynamics, now worthless but for their voting power to a holding company. The name of the holding company was Olivia's Legacy LLC. "You will sign these papers," Alexander stated, leaving no room for negotiation. "In exchange, certain evidence related to the espionage and fraud charges will fail to materialize. The government's case will weaken. You'll still face charges for the assault, but with our influence it will be pleaded down. You'll serve a short token sentence, maybe a year in a low-security facility. When you get out, you will have nothing. Your name will be poison in the tech world. You will leave New York, and you will never ever attempt to contact Olivia or her child again. You will, for all intents and purposes, cease to exist in our world." It wasn't a choice. It was an execution of his life as he knew it. He could choose a quick death or a slow one. He looked into Alexander Hawthorne's cold, merciless eyes, and saw no hint of bluff, no room for appeal. He saw the full, terrifying power of a family that operated on a different plane of existence, a family that wrote its own rules and its own justice. With a trembling hand, Ethan reached for the pen. The scratching sound of his signature on the documents was the sound of his entire world being signed away. He was no longer Ethan Cole, CEO and visionary. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Scarlett Vance's reckoning was of a different but no less final nature. The Hawthornes had no interest in offering her a deal. She had served her purpose. The federal case against her for corporate espionage was airtight. Her attempts to betray Ethan had only dug her own grave deeper. The Hawthornes made sure she was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, hiring a separate legal team to assist the prosecution as a concerned corporate citizen. She was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary, her ambitions of power and wealth turning to dust in a prison cell. Her name, once whispered with a mixture of fear and admiration in financial circles, was now a byword for greed and self-destruction. Alexander collected the signed papers, placed them neatly back in his briefcase, and stood up. He paused at the door and looked back at the broken man slumped in the chair. "You know Ethan," he said, his voice laced with a final, cutting contempt. "My father's one regret in all of this is that he was wrong about you. He thought you were a shark. It turns out you were just a parasite. And parasites, once they've been removed, are very easy to forget." He walked out, leaving Ethan Cole alone in the room with the ruins of his life. 6 months later, the first snows of winter were blanketing the grounds of the Crest in a thick, pristine layer of white. The world outside the estate's formidable stone walls seemed distant and muffled. Inside, in a warm, sunlit room overlooking the frosted gardens, a new life had begun. Olivia Hawthorne. She had legally reclaimed her maiden name the day Ethan's conviction was finalized, rocked her daughter gently in her arms. Little Sophia, Rose Hawthorne, born 2 weeks prior, healthy and strong, was a perfect blend of her mother's grace and the indomitable Hawthorne spirit that shone in her bright, curious eyes. She was the living embodiment of a future reclaimed from the ashes of the past. The journey had not been easy. The trauma of that night had left scars both visible and invisible. There were nightmares, moments of panic, and a deep-seated mistrust of the world. But she was not alone. Her family, who she had once felt so distant from in her gilded cage in Manhattan, had surrounded her with a wall of unwavering love and support. Her father, Richard, who had always been a formidable, almost remote figure, now spent hours simply sitting with her, telling her stories of her own childhood, his eyes soft with a paternal love she was only now beginning to fully understand. Alexander, the fierce protector, had become Uncle Alex, a gentle giant who could be reduced to babbling nonsense by his niece's tiny grasp on his finger. Olivia was no longer the fragile, naive woman who had believed in Ethan Cole's empty promises. The fire she had endured had not consumed her. It had forged her into something stronger, something tempered and resilient. She had found her voice again, not just as a mother, but as a leader. The company formerly known as Nexus Dynamics was now a wholly owned subsidiary of Hawthorne Global. Rebranded as Aegis Security, it had been purged of Ethan's toxic influence under a new CEO, hand-picked by Richard and Alexander, and with Olivia taking an active role on the new board of directors. The company was being rebuilt on a foundation of integrity and genuine innovation. The intellectual property Ethan had signed away was now the cornerstone of Sophia's trust fund, an empire she would one day inherit, built from the rubble of her father's betrayal. One crisp afternoon, Olivia stood by the large bay window in the nursery looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Sophia was asleep in her arms, her small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. Alexander came and stood beside her, following her gaze. "He was released last week," Alexander said quietly, knowing she would want to know. "Low security facility in Minnesota. He served 4 months. He's a free man." Olivia didn't flinch. She felt nothing. No fear, no anger, not even pity. Ethan Cole was a ghost from another life, a name connected to a pain that no longer had power over her. "And where is he now?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "Does it matter?" Alexander replied, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He has no money, no reputation. He's just a man. He has no power here. He has no power over you." Olivia looked down at the beautiful, innocent face of her daughter. Sophia represented a new dawn, a clean slate. She was a Hawthorne, and she would be raised with the strength, love, and protection that came with that name. She would know nothing of her father's cruelty, only of her mother's resilience. "No," Olivia said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in a long time. "No, he doesn't." She turned away from the window and the world outside her, focused entirely on the warm, precious life in her arms. The past was a closed chapter, a story of pain and betrayal that had ended in a spectacular reckoning. This right here was the beginning of a new story, one she would write on her own terms. It would be a story of a mother's love, a family's strength, and the enduring truth that even after the most devastating of storms, a new dawn always breaks. And so the empire built on lies and brutality was brought to its knees not by market forces or competitors, but by the quiet, unstoppable power of a family protecting its own. Ethan Cole learned the hard way that the people you step on your way up are the ones who will be waiting for you on your way down. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of justice. It's a reminder that true strength isn't about how much you can take from others, but about the courage to rebuild after everything has been taken from you. Olivia, now at the helm of her own destiny, with her daughter by her side, is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. If this story of ultimate payback resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that justice can prevail, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of epic revenge and triumphant survival.